Hi, everyone. Guess who forgot their laptop on the way to the venue? So apologies for the slight delay in kicking this off. I'll try and make up some time. And it would be cool if, there's my slides up there. Okay, that makes sense. Cool, awesome. So I'm going to talk today about design engineering, and I'm going to talk about how I think it's having a bit of a moment right now, and how AI might be influencing the sort of growth in design engineering, and some thoughts on what things might look like in the future. I'm Diana, and I've learned that this is how you introduce yourself now. This is what the cool kids are doing. So I am known as Broccolini on most of the internet, and I am head of design at GitHub. GitHub might not be like the first place designers think of as a place to work, so I'm going to talk a bit about how I got there. So I started my journey in working in a print center. I didn't know that this could be a job that I could have when I was at school. Happened by chance that I got an apprenticeship there. And while I was there, I was sort of toying between getting involved in more of the technical side, like IT, and the creative side. And I was lucky enough to discover that there was opportunities in this sort of field. And those opportunities furthered when I found myself working on some internal tools. I had learned a bit of basic programming at school, at college, sorry. And I found myself building a GUI for an access database, because we needed some software to tide us over between switching some purchase order systems. And I knew how to write Visual Basic for apps, VBA, and I knew also that no one really knew how to use the Access software, and so I made this like nice UI with big buttons and form fields and stuff to make it so they didn't have to learn the software. And that was probably the first UI that I designed and also built. I then, and I discovered that there was something exciting about that. I was like, hey, this is a merging of technical and a bit creative as well. And then I learned about the web. The print industry was a little bit worried about the web. They were like, print is dead now, and digital is going to take over everything. And so where I was working, we started to invest more in starting to learn and build websites. And that's when I was like, got really excited, because I could just see this marrying of technical and creative. A little while later, I decided to go find myself and travel across to the other side of the world, to Australia. This is a photo of me next to a sign for Kojonup, where there was the first shire with 1 million sheep, and they still had more sheep than people. But it was a great experience, seeing a different side other than some of the big cities there. And while I was there, after backpacking for a bit, I started to run out of money and headed to Sydney to find some jobs and get paid a bit more money. And I landed a role in local government, and I landed this role and got offered a sponsorship to stay in Australia because I knew how to build websites, and I also had the sort of graphic design skills that they were looking for. So having a little bit of that combination of skills started to open doors for me. While I was in Sydney, I started to meet more people that worked on the web. I started to find the community there. This is a photo of me at what was called Jelly, which was like I don't know why it was called Jelly, but it was a co-working group, and you would just, someone would open their house open or office space, and you would go and hang out there and just work with other people. And it was great because you got to sort of share your work or ask questions with other experts other than the people you usually go to the office with. And this was particularly great for me because I was working in local government, and I was kind of like the only graphic web designer person there. And so this was a really great experience for me. And while I was there, I started to meet more people that were a mix of creative and technical. So Michael there, this is us standing at an event, by the way. We thought we were being cool, like doing a band cover or something like that. But while I was there, so I'd worked with these guys on I'd outsourced to their agency a project. So Michael was a PM when I first met him, but had a background in programming and went back into that and ended up being one of the early hires at Canva, which is quite a successful design tool for people that aren't necessarily designers, and you might have heard of them, big in Australia and have sort of taken over a lot of the world as well. Tim was a engineer, but really loved design as well, and sort of went back and forth between those types of roles. He ended up being the founder of a company called BuildKite, which was like a CI solution tool that you might have heard of or used even. And in that company, as well as being a founder, he also developed the brand and did a lot of the early product design as well. And he's now a principal designer at SourceGraph. So again, like hybrid technical designer skills. And then in the middle there is Cameron. He's the founder of Canva. Before that, he had been working at Google and Google Wave, if anyone remembers that. And he was amazingly good at JavaScript and front end as well as design, and now leads the product and design orgs at Canva as well as being a founder. So meeting these folks helped me realize that there were opportunities in being a bit hybrid, and that might lead to further jobs, and it sort of really grew my interest and excitement to keep learning to code as well as design. So I left government after a while. I wanted to work at a different pace on different problems, and joined a small design agency in Sydney. And this is where my journey with GitHub began. A couple of the engineers and designers were interested in doing a hackathon, and I joined them. And they were like, hey, why don't you sign up for GitHub, and this is where we're collaborating. And they knew that I knew some front end. So this is actually at the hackathon, and that was when I first signed up to use GitHub and started to learn Git. And there was something that sort of sparked, again, my interest there. It felt really good to be working in the same place that developers were. And I also felt really cool that I could be someone with a cool terminal screen like you see on the movies, like hackers and stuff. So that was an added benefit. To keep building on my Git and GitHub skills, I started to play with things like Jekyll, which is a static site generator, so that I had an excuse to keep learning and using GitHub. And then I started to be curious about Silicon Valley and the more of the fast-paced tech scene. And I planned a trip to America and signed up for this thing called the Startup Bus. It was a hackathon on a bus that went from San Francisco to Austin for a big conference called South by Southwest. And luckily I got in. And when I was on the bus, I started chatting to some people, and it just came up that we just started talking about, oh, do you know how to code as well as design? And I said that I was pretty comfortable using Git and GitHub, and they got really excited. And I got asked to join this team. And the team did really well. We got into the finals. We had news articles written about us. It was very, very exciting. I thought I was going to quit my job in Australia and become part of the founder of this startup. We didn't win, unfortunately, but it was a great experience. And the sponsors of the hackathon were looking for a designer. And that led to a job and me moving to the States. So again, it opened doors for me, having that sort of a bit of hybrid skills there. And by the way, that's Max Mullen, who later went on to found Instacart, if some of you have heard of that. Still running, still going today. And so another person that had some of those like hybrid entrepreneurial skills, and just sort of reinforcing that was something that I wanted to follow. So although having both creative and technical skills opened doors for me, I also found myself working in lots of places that kind of like separated those disciplines. While working in a small startup in SF, my boss would ask me why I had code on my screen. And I couldn't understand why that was a problem. We were working on an iOS app, and it was faster for me to make small design changes, upload new assets, than it was to sort of walk over to the engineer, put something in Dropbox or whatever we were using, and explain how I wanted something to look and test it, and then walk back to my desk and change things, because we were working in offices then. But yeah, they would be mad at me for having code on my screen, and I know I'm not the only designer who has experienced that. It really confused me. And it's funny because human-computer interaction design was born of computer science. They didn't start really that separate. But quite often it's reflected in org charts, and people are often asked to like choose a lane. You need to be a designer or an engineer. So to prepare for this talk, because I'm now like what one of my team calls a serious boss person now, I'm not coding and designing every day. I'm managing managers who manage managers who manage managers. I made sure that I spoke to some people who are much closer to this role, actually in this role. And I also spoke to folks in adjacent roles. So I spoke to some of our technical designers, actual software engineers, and people with that title of design engineer at GitHub and outside of GitHub. But I'm going to start with talking about how I think, and the people I talk to think, this discipline started to evolve. So we're going to roll back in time a little bit, and some of you might be familiar with these things. And I'll try and speed through it because to make up a bit of time, and because not everyone likes reliving the past. So first off, probably most of you remember, well, it depends on your age, but probably a lot of you remember the iPhone coming out. And that kind of destroyed BlackBerry and changed people's, like, I think, expectations, not only of phones as like a mini computer in your pocket, but also really started to influence UI design elsewhere on the web as well. Some of you remember responsive design being a thing. Some of you might have done table-based layouts in the past. You might remember liquid design, depending on your age and experience in this industry, and I'm probably aging myself a bit now. But then, obviously the iPhone came with this browser on your phone, and suddenly websites didn't look so great, did they? Because they weren't really designed for a screen that size. And this was this like kind of influenced the phase of starting to design in the browser. This was before we had things like auto layout in Figma, and I found that at this point designers started to realize they really needed to kind of build their UI to get a feel for it. It wasn't enough to just do static mockups. And then we increasingly pushed the boundaries of like CSS. Hands up if you recognize 3 or more of these acronyms on the screen. Okay, a good amount. So I won't go through each of these, but over time, a lot of different frameworks and approaches to, I guess, like just making CSS better to work for the types of UI we were building started to come out. Sass, probably a lot of you have heard of, if not worked with, but some of my favorite features of Sass were things like variables that let you define reusable values like colors and fonts and spacing. Partials and imports were like really handy because it allowed you to sort of split style sheets into smaller pieces, make more modular files. Things like object-oriented CSS That was one of the things in the list. That was developed by Nicole Sullivan, and one of the key patterns that she introduced as part of OOCSS, bit of a mouthful, was to separate container and content, and she demonstrated this in this thing called the media object, which some of you might be familiar with. And so, in short, all of these were approaches to trying to sort of like fight against the cascade and provide organization and scope to CSS, or like as close as you can get to scope in CSS. Because CSS was designed for documents, not these sort of rich web applications, right? It helped us sort of increase usability and reduce the number of lines of CSS that we were sort of carrying around. And then also there were developments on the JavaScript side of things. We saw Node.js come out, I think, in 2009, which was a big influence on the front-end stack. And then you saw other influential JS frameworks come out, like Angular, and then, of course, React, which I think was 2013. And then you started to see CSS3 develop and have more features like transitions and animations and gradients. And it started to play, all of these things started to amount to being able to create more dynamic and like visually appealing websites. And then on the design side, we saw things like flat design come out, and a lot of people attribute this to iOS 7 from Apple, but actually this is one where Microsoft actually beat Apple to the punch with their Windows 8 Metro design language. And you could go deeper in there, like some things were a bit too flat and we had to add more depth back, but again, you started to see that influence the web. Mobile first indexing by Google also influenced how we built and designed websites. And actually, mobile first is a great practice for just design on its own, let alone building for the web. It helps you sort of really reduce down and figure out what your priorities are. And then there was lots of influential leaders in the space coming out with different approaches. You probably heard of Bootstrap. Some of you might have heard of and like or hate, love or hate, Atomic Design by Brad Forrest. I made everyone read this article called About HTML Semantics and Front-End Architecture by Nicholas Gallagher, which really talked about separating your styling from your markup. And I've read, I don't know how many articles by CSS Wizardry. I think his name is Harry Roberts. And lots of things came out and were influenced by these different approaches. And it was all in this effort to make building front end easier to work with, more modular, and sort of deliver these sort of richer experiences. And of course, following things like Bootstrap, design systems became a thing. I think this term was coined by Salesforce, came out with their Lightning design system. And that was when you really started to also see continued developments about handling the front of the front end. And more designers got interested in that space because it's literally a bridge between design and code. You're trying to provide this same language that is understandable by both parties. Some of you may love or hate CSS and JS approaches. Again, I think there was great value in these being developed. Some of you might have heard of CSS modules or styled components. And what this did, I think, is like start to really influence the spec. And I think a lot of people have come back around to writing in CSS or using something like the CSS modules approach, because now CSS has gotten better and we've got some of the features that these approaches were trying to sort of create without it living in the spec. And then to add on to all of this, and we're almost at the end of this section, accessibility was really growing in priority for companies. I mean, it should be anyway, but as you saw, legal cases coming out and standards being developed, and governments like requiring accessible websites for and applications for legal reasons. This became like another like sort of specialized area in front-end and design. And then of course dark mode. If any of you have worked on this like I have, and you've worked on it on an application that wasn't built with dark mode in the beginning and has years and years of UX and front-end debt, you know it's not that as simple as just inverting the colors. And that was another thing that required that sort of bridge between design and development and understanding both parties. So all of these things sort of amounted to this sort of pressure building in front end and design. And some of you might have read this article. It's called The Great Divide by Chris Koya, who's known for things like CSS tricks and just being a slightly famous web person, I guess. And he wrote this article, and I kind of love, I think this like headline sums it up. Said, 2 front-end developers are sitting at a bar and they have nothing to talk about. This is like how, this kind of sums up how some people were feeling. I don't know that this article really helped bridge that divide versus like kind of make it deeper. But in the article, he described that on one side, an army of developers whose interests, responsibilities, and skill sets are heavily revolved around JavaScript. And on the other side, an army of developers whose interests, responsibilities, and skill sets are focused on other areas of the front end, like HTML, CSS, design, interaction, patterns, and accessibility. And following this, you started to see terms like front of the front end and back of the front end develop. And people were arguing over like whether they should be separate or the same role. Later on, Chris Koya reflected on that Great Divide article after an article by Zach Letherman, where he said, I also vehemently reject that I have to exclusively choose one side, and perhaps that is best reflected in my work on 11T. Like, why are we separating these things? This can be part of one role. So I'll leave that there, and I'll talk a little bit about how I think AI might be influencing the growth of design engineering. So we had all this stuff happening in the front end, people arguing about what belonged to what role, some people saying it shouldn't matter, and then more recently came along AI. So in talking to some of the designers and engineers that I spoke to research for this, I think that one of the key things is summed up in this quote from one of our principal designers. He said, like, to test different ideas, you need to escape Figma, and it needs to be built to experience it. So I think AI is forcing something similar to how responsive also influenced design, in that you couldn't really be sure that you were designing a great experience unless you actually sort of really built it out and got a feel for it. One of the challenges with AI is that for a designer, if not engineers, is that it's non-deterministic. In the example on the screen, I'm writing the same prompt with the same model even, and I'm getting slightly different results. And then if you change the model, you can get even more different results, right? And so learning to design for that is a new and challenging experience for designers. We're used to designing for different data and things like user data, but we're used to having more control. And so this response from the model has a huge impact on the user experience. And then sometimes we're met with these difficult challenges where do we design to make bad suggestions from a model tolerable, or do we hope that the model catches up? Some of you might know Copilot, and when our sort of research and development team first launched that GitHub Next, it had this ghost text feature. And the reason that was developed was so that it wouldn't pull people out of that software development flow, so that they could ignore that quickly if they wanted to, or take it on into their work. That was the idea behind it, because we knew that not all the suggestions were that great yet. Things have obviously developed a little bit since then. And yeah, this is an example of GhostX, which launched in the technical preview in June 2021, and just keeping like developers in that flow, and again making it easy to ignore as well. And so models have developed a lot since then. You're not going to be able to like read this, but I had to scale out this far to look at the how LLMs releases have been sort of increasing in frequency. The gap is getting smaller between new models coming out over time, and particularly in the last few years. So Kevin, I was listening to a podcast with an interview with Kevin Wheel, who's the CPO at OpenAI, and they have a philosophy called model maximalism. There we go, got it out. Sorry. And the idea is that the AI model will improve so quickly that it's better to build for capabilities that are just emerging, rather than extensively scaffolding around current limitations. So this approach acknowledges that today's AI models are like the worst you're going to use for the rest of your life. So it's a difficult decision to decide whether to work around the model or try and work to the edge of the model and hope it catches up. So working with AI for designers means using many of the same tools that engineers need to use, because you need to test what the experience is going to be with those different models. So so let's talk about what design engineering is and how it's surfacing as a discipline, as we get the sort of designer's role and the front end role sort of getting closer and closer together. So first up, one of the interesting things I found talking to some of my team and some other folks working in this role is that you can have the title design engineer, or you can be doing some design engineering as part of your job. And there's this most people felt that there's a distinct difference between having the title and sort of occasionally doing some of those activities as a design engineer. So you might consider something like doing a code prototype as design engineering. But the difference, some of the differences is that if you've got engineer in your title, at least by the definition we have at GitHub, and by most of the people I've at least spoken to working in this role, you're also expected to ship code and ship that in production. You have a responsibility there. You might not you might still be working with other engineers to completion, but design engineers are expected to be able to design as well as implement code and ship it to production, whereas designers, they might contribute a bit to that. They might prototype in code, but they're not necessarily on the hook for implementing it. And front-end engineers, they're obviously very close and adjacent to design engineers. They're not responsible for design. They might be responsible for creating an overall great user experience, and hopefully, are caring about what that outcome looks like. But they're not necessarily on the hook to come up with what the experience should be, what that design should be, what the layout should be, what the visuals should be. One of the biggest benefits, really, though, that design engineers have is that pretty much everyone agreed is that you have this sort of really fast feedback loop. Design engineers are essentially designing in code. They're able to see a problem and probably fix it themselves, and that they can get that idea out into an implementation and get a feel for it much faster. But design engineering is also it's also a spectrum. it might seem quite niche, but there's also different types of design engineering roles depending on the team. They might have some similar skills, but they might do quite different things. So I wanted to walk through a couple of those. These are some examples of some of GitHub's marketing websites, which is one of the teams where we have design engineers. They have to work on very creative and often with creative interfaces with often like some animations and things like that. And it often means working on performance too. So while they might be working on like very detailed creative solutions, they're also looking at that like networks tab and ensuring that pages don't have scroll jank and perform really well on different types of devices. A lot of design engineers also like using tools that help them look at design and code together, such as Storybook. On the screen is a short video showing Storybook with one of GitHub's variable fonts, Mona Sans, which allows a designer or an engineer or a design engineer to look at both the code changes as well as like the actual visual results. And speaking of Mona Sans, some of our design engineers in the brand team they worked on a variable font called Mona Sans and another one called Hubert Sans. So they get to work on some very creative projects potentially as well. You can also download these yourself, and I think they're also available in Google now if you're interested. You're not going to maybe grok everything that's happening in this screen. There was too much for me to sort of zoom in on, but design engineers working on design systems also will often hop into design tools like Figma and flesh out and start to design code solutions in Figma with other designers so that they are in a place that works for both those disciplines. It's probably unsurprising given that design systems are meant to provide that unified language. But they find Figma as a tool for thought as well as speccing out some of those details. And then we now more often have design engineers working on product features like Copilot and Copilot Workspace, which is being shown on the screen. So they may do anything from like designing high fidelity prototypes to actually being part of the team that implements code. And it was a design engineer that came up with the initial scope and idea for Workspace and also helped to implement that. And something that I really love seeing the results of are collaborations across these disciplines. And something that I'm really proud of is that we shipped a new sign-up flow that is both beautiful and accessible because we have developed those skills on the team. And so we had a design engineer paired up with an accessibility specialist to implement like a really beautiful and accessible solution. And that's because we're really embracing that sort of hybrid skill and really inviting people to sort of express that and work in that space. And it required a lot of iteration and a lot of, it really helped to have those fast feedback loops with people that could express that in code and understand the design solution as well. So I'll talk a bit about, you might be interested in being a design engineer and like how to become one. So at GitHub, we talk about, there we go. We talk about, I did that because I was trying to like surprise you all because I was listening to Layla's talk yesterday and she said that helps with attention. Yeah, so we talk about shaping and making at GitHub, and some people are good at one or the other, and some people are good at both. And I think that design engineers they can lean one way or the other, but they have a greater ability to do both. And it's a really useful talent to have. And just to be clear, shaping is about shaping the experience and really designing that and thinking about what the customer is going to experience on the other end, and creating a vision that you can share with other people. And if you're a maker, you've got a greater ability to help people see that vision, because you can not only design it, but prototype it out and let people get a feel for it. I think the other thing that helps people get into this field is really just curiosity, right? You don't have to be a design engineer if you don't want to be, but if you want to know where to start, it's really thinking of being curious and caring a bit more about, if you're an engineer, caring more about what the output is, and getting closer to the front end. That helps you, that curiosity helps you learn if you like that discipline and learn new things. I think Layla was also talking about the importance of curiosity in yesterday's keynote. So if you care about the craft and the outcome, and you have that curiosity, that leads to practice, which is really important. People don't always grow, have a passion for something until they become kind of good at it. And practice helps you get there. You learn and you get better at that thing, and then it might develop into a passion. So what's great, though, is that to get into, if you're a designer, to get more into engineering, or an engineer getting into design, really AI is also helping us with lowering that floor and raising the ceiling. So there's more and more tools that are coming out there that help make it easier to step into each other's spaces, and again, keep closing that loop. A lot of the value of design is to get the idea out of your head into something that you can show other people. And so if you can also do that code part too, you've got an advantage there. And there's lots of tools that are coming out. This is one that I'm allowed to show you because it's from GitHub. This is just a quick screenshot of a GIF of GitHub Spark, where you can use to prototype out ideas and prompt your way into, or vibe code your way into solutions there. GitHub Copilot is free as well. If you want to start, if you haven't already and want to start exploring using AI to get further as a designer or as an engineer. And AI is starting to make it easier for engineers to design too. Although I think, most of the tools right now are in that sort of 0 to 1 space. And I think design is, arguably more subjective. You can sort of learn some of the core parts of design as an engineer by exploring these tools. One of the things that I hear a lot of people talking about is I can't be a designer, I don't have any taste. And I would argue that taste is something that you can learn, and you have anyway. Everyone has taste, it's just whether people perceive it as good, right? We're influenced all the time by design of furniture, or the design of an app, or fashion. That all informs our taste. But having curiosity will help you explore what good taste might be like. And having some of these tools available, if you see something out there that's successful, you can say, hey, build an app like, I don't know, Spotify or something. Build me a music app. And that will help you start to learn and pick up on some of those details that make successful user experiences. I want to take a small tangent into human advantages with creativity. I wanted to talk a bit about this because I saw this fantastic talk by someone called Aveda Patrice Sampson. She used to work at Google, has been working in AI for a very long time, and she did this great talk at a conference I went to last year called Skynet Not Yet, if you're interested in looking that up. And she talked about a few different aspects of human advantages over creativity. So I'm sharing my own take on this and some of the things that I think are particular advantages. So one of them, I think, is sort of dreaming and sort of imagining possible designs and futures. And one of the greatest outputs of this, or the best examples of, I think, human imagination that I've personally been able to see is Sagrada de la, wait, is it called Basilica de la Sagrada Familia? Sorry if I'm botching that pronunciation. I got to go to Barcelona a couple of years ago and see this firsthand. And if any of you have seen it, you are hopefully equally impressed. But walking inside, I was absolutely in awe. I just couldn't believe how modern it felt, as well as how beautiful it felt, and also still felt appropriate, I guess. It felt kind of holy and religious and spiritual as well. And what's interesting about this is that this was designed years ago and didn't get completed before before Gaudi, who designed this, died. And so it's continued to be developed after his death, and it's just an incredible example of human imagination. And also what's interesting is the experience, because of that human input, is different over time because it's still being built. So if you went there 5 years ago, you would have seen a different version of Sagrada Familia than you might see today, because it's changed over time. So I think there's something interesting about that human experience and not having that instant result. Drawing, this is also something that it releases endorphins in the brain. This is something we can do as humans, whether you think you can draw or not. And what I find interesting is how people capture different aspects of what they see in different styles, with focus on different elements. And I was listening to this interview on the Design Matters podcast with Debbie Millman, and she was interviewing this guy called Oliver Jeffers, who said everything in his life changed when he learned to stop copying others and listen to the way his hand wanted to draw and paint. That might sound a little funky, but what he meant by that is that when you learn to follow your hand, your style finds you versus you creating it. And so most human beings attempt to draw a straight line, and it's never perfect. But all those wiggles and bumps in that attempt, that is your style. That is the way your hand likes to move and how to draw. And you don't really find your style, it finds you. So another human influence. Maybe you could give this you could ask AI to draw some hand-drawn lines, but it wouldn't be like it is because of the person that drew it. It'd be just copying other results. And I think this is important to think about. I was talking to one of our directors, and he was like, we may need to find new ways to foster creativity or redefine it. With generative AI, you can generate good enough photos, logos, illustrations, but all of those models are retrofitting against the same data or similar data. And I wonder if at some point models being trained after output from other models is going to make it so obviously produced by AI, and it might not be surprising anymore. And we compared this to things like the IKEA. This is a photo of an IKEA chair. The quality has a different embedded value than a chair perhaps handcrafted and carpentered by someone over time. I think we attribute, it doesn't mean that this chair might be good enough for you. This might do its job. But I think we put a different value on that compared to something that's designed to your specifications and crafted by someone in detail over time. So I think there is a need and value to humans in the loop. Humans affect the results. And I wanted to show you a couple of paintings or artworks by my late Auntie Sheila. She had a successful career in IT and then pursued becoming an artist and was successful enough to put on shows and exhibitions and sell her art. And she used to create her art by finding objects. She really loved found objects and and using them in her art. And so there's like the Seeds of Change one is like a dandelion or something that she like pressed and done prints of. Did something similar with the Honesty 3 Indigo one. And then the dancing one is interesting because it's not only influenced by like her style of drawing, what she saw in that moment, but also by the way that the person moved in the room. And again, like, yes, like AI could create these things if you fed it the right images and the right information, but you know that those results aren't how they are because a human wasn't involved. Whereas when I look at these paintings, I know that these are the results because of the leaf or flower that my auntie happened to pick up on that day, or because of the way the dancer moved in the room and what she saw in that and the way that she wanted to create those results. So I perceive this with a different value. And finally, I want to talk about happy accidents, and I can't really talk about happy accidents without talking about GitHub's mascot, the Octocat, who internally we call Mona Lisa Octocat. This was a stock illustration that one of our founders grabbed and put on our 404 page. And over time, it's turned into this beloved mascot that is a really key part of our brand that we've created like Disney level like animations and mini films of that people love so much. Sometimes they get tattooed. I don't know. I love it, but I don't know if I go that far. And it's just become like a key identity and part of our brand and our logo even. And that was because of a happy accident. And I don't know how I would ask AI to create that happy accident. So coming to a close now, I'm sure lots of you want to go and grab food and have your lunch and things. So what does the future of software design look like? How will AI influence our creativity, the way we work, and how we design and code? I want to reference again the importance of humans in the loop. There's a talk that I really love by Wilson Miner that he did years ago called When We Build. And he says, as more of the tools we live with every day become delightful instead of physical, our opportunity and responsibility as designers is multiplying. We live in a world of screens, and we are the ones who decide what goes on them. We are in a unique position to have an impact, one that lasts longer than the next redesign or the latest technology. So I think that there's still like a great responsibility for us as designers and engineers in shaping our tools that shape us and shape the world around us. And that's particularly important right now in the age of AI. We need to be mindful of how those tools influence us. I think, though, that in software design and product design, we'll need the same traits we needed for other new interaction models like the iPhone or like when responsive came out. They will still, we're just working with a different medium. We need to be comfortable learning new tech and getting comfortable prompting and all those fun things that come with AI. But I think it's about exploring those possibilities and still using our skills as designers to show empathy for what we're creating for our customers. Some of you may have seen the Sam and Johnny website that got shipped yesterday. And I remember, I wanted to include this quote because I remember when we were first working on Copilot, we didn't have a design team, and I remember several people saying, we don't need designers working on this, it's just like text in a UI. And that has not been the case at all. Like, there's a lot to do with designing that experience, and we have a duty and responsibility to. And I saw this quote from Sam, where he says, AI is an incredible technology, but great tools require work at the intersection of technology, design, and understanding people and the world. And that's why I still think there is like a space for humans in the loop in the role of designing for AI in that future. I don't think we're going to obliterate those roles entirely. I think at some point we'll stop talking about AI. Some of you might be ready for that, depending on the talks that you've gone to at this conference. It will just be part of the stack that we work with. And you still need taste and style and all the things that I just talked about that influence human creativity. AI is just going to be like another medium that influences it. I see design and engineering as critical to that, and I see the role of design engineers as something that's growing. We're certainly hiring more for that at GitHub because of being in that role where you can really understand the technology and create great experiences of it. But regardless of the technology, the skills we need, or the org structure, I do hope that more companies kind of embrace those blurred edges of these roles and stop trying to make people force down one path or the other. Or as a friend of mine, Jem Gold, aptly put it, you can do whatever you want and there's still gold at the intersections. So I hope that has, if you're interested in this role, I hope that's inspired you a little bit and encouraged you to work at those blurry edges. And thank you very much for coming to my talk today, and hope you have a great rest of your conference.